In the distant future, humanity has spread across the galaxy, leaving behind the confines of their home planet and establishing themselves as a force to be reckoned with. Despite their humble beginnings on Earth, humans have learned to adapt, evolve, and rise beyond expectations. In this era of exploration and interstellar conquest, humans broke the rules of the galaxy and became unstoppable. When humanity first ventured into space, they were seen as naive and primitive by the more advanced civilizations that occupied the stars. These species, who had mastered the arts of warfare, diplomacy, and technology long before humans, viewed the newcomers with a mix of amusement and disdain. To the galaxy's elite, humans were an afterthought, a species to be ignored or treated as inferiors. But the humans proved their resilience time and time again. They weren't bound by the limitations that held others back, not bound by the rules of the galaxy that dictated how things were meant to unfold. Every attempt to subdue them or push them into a corner only fueled their determination. Where others saw a chaotic and reckless species, they saw opportunity, an opportunity to carve their place in the cosmos, not as servants, but as leaders. The first spark of change began when humans discovered the long-forgotten technology scattered throughout the galaxy. Ancient ruins and relics from civilizations that had long since fallen into obscurity were scattered across countless worlds. These artifacts were more than just remnants of history. They held the key to unimaginable power, knowledge, and technology. Humans, driven by their insatiable curiosity and thirst for advancement, uncovered secrets that even the oldest species had long since abandoned or forgotten. With this newfound power, humans began to innovate at a pace that left the rest of the galaxy stunned. Where other species had clung to old traditions and stagnant ways of thinking, humans were unafraid to break free from convention. Their adaptability, creativity, and sheer willpower enabled them to turn even the most dangerous alien technology into something of their own design. The galaxy's old powers, which had relied on their centuries-old strategies and advanced weaponry, suddenly found themselves outmatched by humanity's relentless ingenuity. As humans grew bolder, they began to challenge the established norms of galactic governance. No longer content to be subjugated by the dictates of older, more powerful races, they formed alliances with species that had once been considered beneath them. These alliances were not born from mutual respect or trust, but from the recognition that humans were a force to be reckoned with. The galaxy's power structures, once dominated by the elite, were beginning to crumble under the weight of humanity's ambition and unity. One of the most significant shifts came when humans invented new forms of faster-than-light travel, a breakthrough that no one thought possible. The technology was a game-changer, enabling humanity to traverse the vast distances between star systems in a fraction of the time it took others. The old interstellar trade routes, which had been tightly controlled by established empires, were suddenly disrupted by the human speed and efficiency. No longer reliant on outdated methods of travel, humans were able to outmaneuver their rivals, striking wherever they needed, whenever they needed, and often before their enemies even knew what hit them. This newfound mobility gave humans an edge that no other species could match. The galaxy's long-standing rulers, who had grown complacent in their positions of power, found themselves being outflanked, outsmarted, and overrun by humanity's determination to break every rule that had been established. But it wasn't just technology that gave humans their edge. It was their unyielding drive to push boundaries. They didn't just seek to survive in the galaxy. They sought to thrive, to impose their will upon the stars themselves. This mindset led them to conquer planets, to form empires of their own, and to establish dominion over star systems that were once considered uninhabitable or too dangerous for any race to settle. Humans took risks that no other species dared to take. They colonized hostile worlds, faced down creatures and environments that would have destroyed lesser beings, and turned these places into thriving hubs of civilization and industry. One of the most infamous episodes in humanity's rise to power came when they challenged the galaxy's most feared and respected empire, the Zalaf Dominion. The Zalaf were an ancient race known for their ruthlessness and advanced technology. They had controlled vast regions of the galaxy for millennia, crushing any who dared to oppose them. For centuries, the Zalaf believed themselves to be invincible, their supremacy unquestioned. When humanity, in a bid to expand their influence, dared to challenge the Zalaf, the galaxy watched with bated breath. The war between humanity and the Dominion was brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses. But humans refused to yield. They used every tactic at their disposal, from guerrilla warfare to psychological manipulation, exploiting every weakness in the Dominion's vast empire. In the end, the Zalath were forced to surrender, a humiliating defeat that sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The humans' victory over the Zalath was more than just a military success. It was a symbol of their unrelenting will and ability to defy the expectations placed upon them. The galaxy, once divided by ancient rivalries and power struggles, now had a new player, a force that was unafraid to break the rules and reshape the order of the universe. As humanity's influence continued to grow, so did their ambitions. They sought not just to conquer, but to unite the galaxy under a single banner. Their vision was one of unity and cooperation, where every species had a role to play, no matter how small or insignificant they seemed. They sought to create a new order, one that was not bound by old hierarchies or prejudices, but one that recognized the value of every life, every civilization, every culture. Despite the resistance they faced from the galaxy's old powers, humanity's efforts to break the rules of the galaxy continued unabated. They proved time and time again that they would not be held back by the limitations imposed by the established order. Through their courage, intelligence, and sheer willpower, humans became the driving force behind a new age of galactic exploration, innovation, and unity. The galaxy had changed forever, and it was clear to all that humanity had become the greatest force the universe had ever seen. No one could stop them. No one could stand in their way. The humans had broken the rules of the galaxy, and they were just getting started. As humanity's reach extended across the stars, they began to challenge not only the physical boundaries of the galaxy, but also the very ideologies that had long governed it. The age-old systems of power, built on fear, conquest, and dominance, began to crumble in the face of humanity's more egalitarian vision. The old races that had once viewed humans with condescension and skepticism now found themselves facing an undeniable truth. Humanity was not just another fleeting species. They were a force capable of reshaping the very fabric of the galaxy itself. Humans had come to represent the power of resilience, the drive to overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable it seemed. Their willingness to fight for what they believed in. Humanity's response was multifaceted. The Galactic Council underwent a profound transformation, becoming a more decentralized, federated body that allowed for greater regional autonomy while still upholding the core values of cooperation, peace, and mutual respect. New safeguards were put in place to ensure that the voices of smaller, often marginalized species were heard, and that power would not be concentrated in the hands of few. The Council reformed its approach to governance, introducing a rotating leadership system that allowed for greater diversity of representation and perspective. At the same time, humanity worked to strengthen the alliances that had formed with other species, building diplomatic and economic ties that transcended political and ideological differences. It was clear that the galaxy could not thrive if it was divided. Human leaders began to push for deeper collaboration between species, not just on matters of governance and trade, but on cultural exchange, scientific cooperation, and shared exploration. The idea was to create a galaxy where each species could maintain its own identity while working together to address the challenges that face them all. Still, the specter of internal strife remained. Rogue factions, though less numerous, still held sway in certain corners of the galaxy. Humanity knew that the only way to overcome this was to prove, through action and example, that cooperation and unity were not simply lofty ideals, but necessary for survival in the vast, unpredictable cosmos. And then, there were the new mysteries, the questions that were yet unanswered. Humanity's thirst for exploration continued unabated as they ventured deeper into the unknown regions of the universe. They discovered strange phenomena, vast energy fields that seemed to bend space itself, ancient starships and structures that predated even the oldest galactic empires, and hints of intelligence far older than the known races. With each new discovery, humanity faced the possibility of finding something or someone that could challenge their understanding of the universe entirely. It was in these mysteries that humanity's most profound lesson was found. The galaxy was a place of infinite complexity and unknown possibilities, and to truly lead it, they needed to approach it not with arrogance, but with humility. They were no longer the reckless explorers of old, driven by ambition alone. Instead, they had become stewards of the galaxy, recognizing that their power was not an end in itself, but a means to protect and nurture the countless civilizations that called it home. As humanity continued to push the boundaries of exploration, innovation, and unity, they had one clear understanding. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and dangers alike. And while they had shattered the old rules of the cosmos, they now understood that the true test of their legacy was not in how many stars they could claim or how many empires they could topple, but in how well they could navigate the complexities of a galaxy where no one species held all the answers. In the end, the galaxy was no longer just a battleground for dominance. It had become a canvas of creation, a place where every species, every individual, could contribute to a greater, shared vision. And as humanity stood at the helm, ready to face whatever new challenges awaited, they knew that the galaxy, with all its mysteries and potential, was theirs to protect and to build upon. The rules had been broken, but now they had the responsibility to write the future of the stars. As such, the Galactic Council evolved again, incorporating new mechanisms to ensure that all voices, no matter how small or unconventional, were heard. This process was not without struggle. Factions within the Council often clashed, but through diplomacy and a commitment to dialogue, humanity and their allies navigated these challenges. In time, new technologies emerged that allowed for even greater interstellar communication, making it easier for distant species to interact directly with one another. A new era of education and knowledge sharing began, one where the best minds from every species could collaborate freely, without the interference of power struggles or political agendas. This shift gave rise to a new form of galactic citizenship, one that transcended borders and species, encouraging a shared sense of identity. But the human spirit was not content to simply maintain the peace they had forged. Humanity had always been driven by curiosity, by the insatiable desire to reach further, to discover what lay beyond the next horizon. With the technology they had developed and the alliances they had formed, they set their sights on the unknown regions of the universe. They began to explore the farthest reaches of space, venturing into uncharted galaxies, seeking out new worlds, and encountering species that had been lost to time. In these uncharted regions, they found remnants of civilizations that had long since fallen. Some had been destroyed by war, others by natural catastrophes, and some had simply faded into obscurity. These discoveries sparked renewed interest in galactic history and the importance of understanding the past. Humanity's desire to preserve knowledge and history grew, and they began to establish great archives, libraries, and research facilities on distant worlds. These centers became a hub for scholars, scientists, and explorers alike, each seeking to uncover the mysteries of the universe. At the same time, the rise of new technologies and the widespread availability of resources allowed humanity to create cities and colonies in the most inhospitable of environments. They built floating cities on gas giants, underground cities on ice-covered moons, and massive orbital stations that connected the galaxy's far-flung star systems. These endeavors were not just about survival, but about proving that there was no frontier too great for humanity to conquer. Yet, even as humanity ventured deeper into the unknown, there were those who warned against pushing too far, too fast. They feared that in their quest for knowledge and expansion, humanity might awaken forces they could not control, ancient technologies, forgotten entities, or even new dangers lurking in the void. The balance that humanity had worked so hard to establish could easily be disrupted if they were not careful. Despite these warnings, humanity pressed forward. They had come to understand that stagnation was their greatest enemy. The galaxy was ever-changing, and the universe itself was a vast, untapped frontier. As long as they remained true to their core values, adaptability, innovation, and unity, they believed they could navigate any challenge that lay ahead. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibility. And so, humanity continued to shape the destiny of the galaxy, breaking every rule that had been set before them, not to conquer or dominate, but to lead by example, to show that the impossible was only the beginning. They had shattered the old order, and now, with unshakable resolve, they were ready to break new ground, explore new worlds, and build a future that no one, not even the stars themselves, could predict. The galaxy was theirs to reshape, and humanity would do so with a boundless ambition that had always defined them. There were no limits, not anymore. As humanity ventured deeper into the cosmos, the scale of their ambitions only grew. Their thirst for knowledge, exploration, and innovation was unquenchable. With every world they colonized, every star they reached, and every ancient mystery they uncovered, the galaxy became an even more interconnected and dynamic entity. New technologies, inspired by the artifacts and lost knowledge of long-dead civilizations, reshaped the very way humans interacted with the universe. Faster-than-light travel became more efficient, allowing humanity to cover distances that once took years in mere moments. Complex, self-sustaining ecosystems were created in harsh environments, and the notion of distance began to feel obsolete. But even as their influence expanded, humanity was not immune to the consequences of their own success. As they transformed the galaxy into a flourishing, interconnected network, the weight of leadership grew heavier. The Galactic Council, once a symbol of unity, began to show cracks. With so many species, cultures, and philosophies coexisting, disagreements grew more frequent, and sometimes the very ideals that had once united the galaxy began to be questioned. Was this unity worth the cost of individuality? Were they truly building a better future for all, or were they imposing their own vision on a galaxy that may not fully share it? New factions began to rise, groups that disagreed with the centralization of power under the human-led coalition. They argued that the galaxy's diversity and history were being overshadowed by humanity's relentless drive for progress. These factions, though small at first, began to garner support, particularly among species that felt their autonomy was being eroded in the face of humanity's ever-expanding influence. The growing division highlighted a fundamental tension. While humanity's quest to unite the galaxy was noble, it also risked stifling the very diversity and freedom that had once been celebrated in the stars. And then there were those who simply saw humanity's rise as a challenge to their own power. The remnants of the galaxy's ancient empires, some now little more than shadows of their former selves, sought to reclaim their influence by any means necessary. These old powers had long relied on their ability to manipulate interstellar politics and warfare to keep species in check. But now, they face a new and more formidable adversary, one that was not interested in maintaining the status quo, but in changing it entirely. These tensions culminated in a series of diplomatic crises that threatened the fragile peace humanity had fought so hard to create. What had once been a cooperative, if diverse, union of species now faced a potential of civil unrest. Some planets, once loyal to the Galactic Council, began to secede, pushing for greater autonomy. Skirmishes broke out in the fringes of known space, and rogue factions sought to establish their own empires, bent on restoring what they saw as the rightful order of the galaxy. In response, humanity faced an internal reckoning. Their leaders knew that they had to adapt, not just to external threats, but to the growing pressures within their own coalition. Unity, once their greatest strength, was now their greatest vulnerability. They realized that if they were to continue to lead, they would have to balance progress with understanding, ambition with patience. The next phase of their journey would require not just breaking the rules of the galaxy, but forging new ones, rules that would respect the diversity of life, culture, and thought that made the galaxy unique, while ensuring that peace and cooperation prevailed. True unity didn't mean conformity. Rather, it meant a collective strength built on the diversity of ideas, cultures, and experiences. While some species were still reluctant to fully embrace this philosophy, many others found strength in it, and their own cultures began to evolve in unexpected and enriching ways. There were species that had once been warlike, but under humanity's influence, they turned their talents toward diplomacy and science. There were others who had been technologically stagnant, but with the help of human ingenuity, they began to make rapid advancements in fields they had once considered out of reach. The greatest testament to humanity's success was the establishment of the Galactic Council, a body that would guide the galaxy into a future where power was shared, not hoarded. The Council was not just a bureaucratic institution. It was a living organism, constantly evolving and adapting to the needs of the galaxy. It was comprised of representatives from every species, with humanity playing a central but collaborative role. Humans had become not just leaders, but facilitators, guiding others toward their potential rather than imposing their will. They had become the bridge between the ancient civilizations of the galaxy and the newer, more radical ways of thinking that were emerging in the wake of their rise. However, not every corner of the galaxy had embraced this new era. There were still rogue factions, rogue empires, and ancient organizations that resisted humanity's influence. Some of these groups were remnants of the old galactic powers that had once ruled with an iron fist, while others were new threats that sought to exploit the weaknesses in the newly formed galactic system. These enemies, though scattered and disorganized, represented a constant reminder that peace was not a given, and that the galaxy's balance of power could tip at any moment. The most formidable of these new threats came from a race of shadowy beings known as the Vishari. Little was known about them, as they kept to the fringes of galactic space, hidden in the deep, uncharted areas of the universe. The Vishari were masters of espionage, subterfuge, and sabotage. They had long operated in the shadows, manipulating galactic events from behind the scenes. While they had initially been overlooked by humanity's growing empire, it became clear that the Vishari would stop at nothing to destabilize the fragile peace humanity had worked so hard to create. In response to this rising threat, humanity began to mobilize, calling on the Galactic Council to take a firm stand against the Vishari. But the Vishari were no ordinary enemies. They didn't fight with weapons or armies. Instead, they sowed discord, spreading misinformation and exploiting divisions. They turned allies against one another, playing on ancient fears and prejudices that still lingered in the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, humanity found itself fighting not just for territory, but for the very ideals that had brought them together in the first place. This conflict tested humanity's resolve like never before. But humanity, driven by the lessons of their past, would not falter. They had learned to fight with their minds, as much as with their might. They used the very tools that had enabled them to rise, technology, diplomacy, and creativity, to outsmart and outmaneuver the Vishari. In the end, the battle wasn't won with force, but with unity. The galaxy, united by the shared values that humanity had instilled in it, stood together against the threat, showing the Vishari that the days of dark manipulation were over. With the Vishari threat neutralized, humanity's legacy was further cemented. The galaxy had indeed changed, not through the brute force of conquest, but through the gradual and unwavering determination to build something better. The future, once uncertain and fraught with conflict, now seemed full of promise. But humanity knew that peace was not a permanent state. It had to be nurtured and defended at every turn. And so, the journey continued. Humanity remained vigilant, ever watchful for new challenges, but always moving forward. The rules of the galaxy, once strict and unyielding, were now seen as guidelines that could be bent, reshaped, or even broken if the need arose. The galaxy was no longer the domain of the powerful, the ancient, or the elite. It was humanity's galaxy, a place where anything was possible, where the impossible was within reach. And as long as humanity stood united, no force, no matter how great, could ever stand in their way. The rules had been broken, and humanity had become the rule makers. As humanity's influence continued to expand across the galaxy, they faced a new realization. Their ultimate challenge would not come from external forces, but from within. The very ideals that had propelled them to greatness, cooperation, unity, and the will to break boundaries, had made them a powerful force. But they had also created a new set of questions, doubts, and complexities that would test the foundations of their society. As the galaxy evolved, so too did the responsibility that came with wielding such power. Humanity had once been driven by the need to overcome their limitations, to prove they were against overwhelming odds. But now, the galaxy they had built stood on the precipice of its own new challenges. The questions were no longer just about survival, but about the balance of power, the nature of freedom, and the preservation of the values that had shaped them. Were they truly ready to lead in a galaxy that was no longer bound by the old rules? Could they continue to push for progress without losing sight of the very ideals that made them who they were? The ever-expanding borders of human influence sparked tension within the very systems they had worked so hard to establish. As more species joined the Galactic Council, differing cultural ideologies and approaches to governance began to surface. Some species, who had once been subjugated by their own primitive or warlike tendencies, now questioned whether the human-led council was truly representative of all life. Others feared that humanity's rapid pace of progress might lead to unintended consequences, such as the creation of a new class of elite rulers or even a return to a form of authoritarianism disguised as progress. These fears were not unfounded. In the midst of this growth, there were those who sought to manipulate the system for their own gain, using the galaxy's ideals of unity and cooperation as a facade to consolidate power. The question of what it meant to be human, what the future humanity truly held, became a central point of discussion. Some believed that humanity had reached the pinnacle of their potential and needed to turn inward, focusing on preservation and consolidation. Others, driven by the same spirit of exploration that had brought them to the stars, argued that they should push even further to uncover the mysteries that lay beyond the known galaxy. There was an underlying tension between those who wanted to maintain peace and those who believed that the future could only be secured by continuing the pursuit of the unknown. It was in these moments of uncertainty that humanity's greatest strength became clear: their adaptability. Unlike the older civilizations that had clung to rigid traditions, humans were not afraid to confront difficult questions and revise their approaches when needed. They were willing to learn from their mistakes, to innovate, and to rethink the very systems they had built. To go beyond the limitations imposed on them became a symbol that inspired countless other races. These new alliances weren't built on fear or mutual interest alone. They were founded on a shared belief in the idea that the galaxy could be a place of cooperation and progress rather than conflict and division. However, the rise of humanity didn't go unchallenged. While the established galactic powers were quick to recognize the strength of humanity's resolve, there were still those who saw their ascension as a threat to the old order. New enemies emerged, some of whom were willing to go to any lengths to preserve the status quo. They sought to undermine humanity's influence through sabotage, political intrigue, and even assassination. These conspirators, composed of elites and factions whose power was built on control, recognized that a galaxy united under humanity's ideals would mean the end of their dominance. Despite these threats, humanity's progress was unstoppable. Every challenge, every setback only fueled their determination to push forward. Human leaders, both military and political, proved to be adept at adapting to new circumstances, always staying one step ahead of their enemies. They employed an intelligence network that spanned the galaxy, gathering information from every corner of the universe, ensuring that no plan to destabilize their efforts went unnoticed. One of the key factors in humanity's success was the way they operated as a unified species. While many galactic civilizations were fragmented by internal power struggles and cultural divides, humanity understood that only through solidarity could they succeed. They had learned from their history, from the mistakes of old Earth, where war, division, and distrust had once threatened to tear them apart. Now, under the banner of a single, unified cause, they put aside petty differences and worked toward a common goal of galactic harmony. They weren't just conquerors, they were builders, creators, and thinkers. Humanity's engineering prowess allowed them to construct massive fleets, cities, and infrastructure across countless worlds, turning barren planets into thriving centers of industry and culture. They brought innovation to every corner of the galaxy, pushing the boundaries of technology, science, and medicine, and improving the lives of those around them. Even species that had once been their rivals now found themselves benefiting from the advancements humans brought to the table. The concept of galactic unity, championed by humanity, soon began to gain traction. The idea of a unified galaxy, where all species could thrive regardless of their background or history, started to replace the outdated notion of imperialism and domination. Humanity's model of governance, which emphasized cooperation and mutual respect, was hailed as a beacon of hope for those who had long suffered under oppressive regimes. The oppressive empires of the past, which had sought to control every aspect of life in the galaxy, were beginning to see their control slip away as more and more races aligned themselves with humanity's cause. Even the most powerful and feared species in the galaxy began to question their old ways. Some, like the Zalath, still clung to their ancient traditions of conquest and subjugation. But their power was fading, their grip on the galaxy slipping as more and more systems fell under the influence of the human-led coalition. These old powers, once untouchable, found themselves forced to make difficult choices, adapt to the changing landscape or risk being swept away by the tide of progress that humanity had set in motion. But humanity's journey wasn't just about expanding their influence. It was about leaving a legacy, about making sure that the galaxy they built would be one that could endure for generations to come. As the once fractured civilizations of the galaxy began to unite, they formed a council, a new governing body that would oversee the operations of the galaxy. The council, though composed of representatives from many species, was heavily influenced by human ideals of fairness, justice, and progress. The once rigid and outdated hierarchies were replaced with a more fluid and egalitarian system, where every voice, no matter how small, had a seat at the table. Under this new order, the galaxy began to flourish. Advances in technology, medicine, and education were shared freely, and species that had once been isolated or oppressed found themselves given the opportunity to rise and contribute. Trade flourished, but so did cultural exchange. The galaxy was no longer a cold and indifferent expanse, but a thriving, interconnected network of species working together toward a common goal. Yet, even as humanity's influence reached its peak, they understood the importance of remaining vigilant. The galaxy, though united in many ways, was still a place of vast, untapped potential and also hidden dangers. Old rivalries, though suppressed for now, could resurface at any time. And even within their own ranks, there were those who might seek to exploit humanity's power for their own gain. But humanity, forged in the fires of adversity and driven by an unbreakable will, was ready. The lessons of their past, of overcoming their limitations, of standing against impossible odds, were never forgotten. They were the key to the future, to a galaxy that, for the first time in its long history, was truly open to change. And so, humanity's journey continued, not as conquerors, but as leaders, building, uniting, and evolving the galaxy, breaking the rules in ways no one had ever dreamed possible. No one could stop them, and no one would. As a new era dawned, humanity's influence spread to every corner of the galaxy, touching species and worlds that had long been isolated or forgotten. The once fractured and war-torn star systems, long plagued by conflicts over resources, power, and ideology, began to find a common ground under humanity's vision of shared prosperity. Peace, once thought impossible, became a realistic goal as humans leveraged their unparalleled ability to mediate and build bridges between former enemies. Humanity's vision of the future was one of interconnectedness, where technology and culture could flourish side by side. No longer would advanced weapons and military dominance dictate the fate of the galaxy. Instead, it was innovation, creativity, and mutual respect that now held the power. Humans didn't just conquer worlds, they transformed them. Desolate planets, ravaged by war or hostile environments, became centers of life, technology hubs, and educational sanctuaries. This wasn't a typical galactic empire built on oppression and control. It was a network of thriving civilizations built on progress and opportunity. Yet, despite the apparent harmony, the challenges of maintaining this new order were ever present. Old wounds were slow to heal, and not all species were fully aligned with humanity's values. Though many had been drawn to the promise of peace and cooperation, there remained factions that resisted, preferring the old ways of dominance and secrecy. There were also those who believed humanity's rapid rise was a threat to the very fabric of galactic society, fearing that humanity's unchecked ambition would one day lead to authoritarian rule. These dissenting voices became increasingly vocal, but humanity remained undeterred, committed to their vision of a galaxy that was free from tyranny. At the heart of humanity's power was their unwavering belief in the importance of individual agency. They recognized that,